Hi everyone, my name is Jen. I'm an author and a book reviewer, and I think that thumbnail was my workout for this week. I didn't film a wrap up in June because I didn't read a huge amount, and the books that I had read I'd covered in a themed reading vlog, so I just thought I won't film one in June. And then the end of July came around and I looked at how many books I'd read in both months and thought maybe I should have done a June wrap up. So we've got a bumper wrap up today. I think we've got about 26 books to get through. Yeah, it's going to be quite a casual one, talking to you about what I liked, what I didn't like, and linking any longer reviews where relevant, and that's the case for a couple of these books, which are now scattered across the floor because I couldn't put them down elegantly at all. Also, I'm looking after Lola today. She's currently sleeping on the bed, but she may ask to come into this room at some point. She was very disappointed when all of these books were propped up on this chair because it's her favourite place to sleep. But as you can see by this cutaway, she didn't particularly care and managed to daintily get around them and lie down anyway. So let us dive into the books. I'm also going to take a break halfway through so that we can make some lunch together. And this video is also kindly sponsored by Skillshare, which I will talk about when I'm making lunch. But into the books. In June, I read 3 of my most anticipated releases and filmed a whole reading vlog talking about them, so I'll link that in the description box. First off, I read Bitter by Akwaeke Emezi. This is a prequel to her book Pet, which was one of my favourite books a couple of years ago. Pet was definitely for an upper middle grade YA audience and could also be enjoyed by adults. I would say this is definitely for a more mature audience, so for a YA or adult audience. I just say that in case you bought Pet for a younger person in your life, you may want to check this out before giving it to them. This is, I guess, like Pet's older sister, which is maybe a confusing thing to say because this is a prequel and it's about the main character of Pet's mother. This is a book that is about monsters, angels, how in this world you can magically call upon them or bring them about through art. It's also about protest and about how different people can protest in different ways, and a discussion on how people can protest depending on who they happen to be, what they're passionate about, and also what their abilities are, and how we respect all of those things. That for me was the thing that particularly shone about this book. Pet was definitely a book that I loved more than this, but I still very much enjoyed it. Then I read Idol by Louise O'Neill. This is a book for grown-ups, which I say because she also writes YA fiction as well. And it's about a woman who gets herself tangled up in this infuriating situation. It's one of those books where you see what the characters are doing and it just makes you want to scream. Samantha Miller is an influencer, and this is a book that looks at social media in a very nuanced way, in the same way that Underbelly by Anna Whitehouse did, which I loved. Was that last year? I think that was last year. If you've also read this book and loved it, then I think you will really enjoy Idol. Samantha Miller has got herself to the top by doing some rather questionable things. She likes to rewrite herself over and over again. And she's also written several books, the latest of which has an essay in it about a childhood friend. That childhood friend reads it, is really annoyed about the way she has been written about, and then threatens to blackmail Samantha. So it's about her going back to her hometown, kind of confronting herself with her past and reconciling or not reconciling certain things. It's an incredibly tense book. Speaking of tension, I read Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. This is her debut novel. I read her short story collection Salt Slow a couple of years ago and really enjoyed it. The way that she is able to toy with words is brilliant, and this is definitely a novel that you read to be immersed in the language and the imagery rather than the plot, which is definitely there, but is not, for me at least, the highlight of this text. This is about a married couple, Miri and Leah. Miri has been so worried that her wife Leah has gone missing, never to return. She went on an expedition on a submarine and the submarine was thought to be lost, but then one day she gets a call from the company her wife works at saying, you can come and collect your wife now. But when she goes to collect her, she is definitely not the same person. It's creepy, it's eerie, it has lots of fantastic imagery of the bottom of the sea. I found it very unsettling in the best way possible. Speaking of new releases, I read this year's new Nicci French book. I also read Sunday Morning Coming Down and Day of the Dead, which are the final 2 books in the Free Decline series. I think I'm gonna pause rereading them for a bit and delve into other audiobooks. For now, I'm gonna prize myself away from the comfort rereads, which is of course a fine thing to do, but I have lots of other things that I want to be getting to. But the reason that I mention these rereads, one, because I read them, even though you've heard me talk about them plenty of times before, but two, I have seen a couple of people posting about Frida Klein books recently on Instagram saying that I had encouraged you to get to them, which is wonderful, but that you'd picked up a book that was in the middle of the series, and was that okay? And I just wanted to quickly say, I mean, obviously you can, but I really would recommend not doing that, because there is a through plot throughout the series, and I think you'll ruin it for yourself if you start in the middle. So begin with Blue Monday, which is the first book in the series. It goes Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then the final book is The Book of the Dead. And as always, I would recommend the audiobooks, which are narrated by Beth Chalmers. If you're new, they're my favourite crime series ever. I have a video on them in the description box down below. But I read this as well, which is The Favour. This is their new book, which is out in October. The premise is really wonderful. It is about a woman who is a doctor, and one day at work, her old boyfriend from when she was 17 turns up and says, "I need you to help me, please." He won't tell her what the favour is. He just tells her that she needs to meet him in a certain place in the countryside at the weekend. She needs to not tell anybody where she's going, and she needs to bring certain things with her. And she owes him. We don't know why she owes him at first. That is revealed as the novel continues, but she feels like she has to do this thing for him. But of course, it doesn't really go to plan. Everything gets very, very messy, and she finds herself in the middle of a crime scene. Whilst I really loved the premise of this book, and I did enjoy the beginning in particular, this ended up not being my favourite Nicci French book, unfortunately. I would still recommend it if the premise appeals to you, but I think I've realised that when they're focusing on a relationship in particular between two people, like with their book Secret Smile and with The Safe House, a couple that spring to mind, they're never my favourites. I think in this book there were quite a few repetitive elements. I didn't quite believe in all of the characters, and I couldn't really get to grips with Jude, who's the main character, because we meet her at this turning point in her life, which is of course what you normally do in novels, but I couldn't really get a handle on who she was before this all started to happen and before her life started to unravel, because as soon as she gets in this mess, she distances herself from everybody else in her life. I wanted more information on how she was before all of this happened. Call me nosy. So I liked it, but I would say if you were starting with Nicci French, there are others that I would personally recommend much more. And as I said, I have made a video on all of their books, which I will link in the description box down below. Another book that was a disappointment, but this one was a much bigger disappointment, and this was one of my most anticipated releases for this year too. This is Scattered All Over the Earth by Yoko Tawada, and this is translated from the Japanese by Margaret Mitsutani. And again, the premise of this is amazing, because it's about a world where Japan has disappeared due to climate crisis, and its inhabitants have been scattered around the earth. Our main character is trying to find other people of Japanese descent so that they can speak to them and find out more about their home country. But it's just not a book that came together for me at all. I felt as though it was trying to have lots of philosophical discussions, and some of those were successful, some of them weren't. There were lots of clumsy discussions on gender. I wrote about this in a review for Toast, which I will link in the description box down below, going into more detail about what I did and didn't like about the text, but this one was definitely a disappointment for me, and that was a shame. I read this, which is a kind of series of vignettes, graphic memoir type book called Hello Mum by Polly Dunbar, and I would recommend this for any new mums in your life, or maybe just a copy for your own mum, perhaps. Polly's illustration style really reminds me of Quentin Blake, squiggly and full of emotional impact, just able to get across such complex things in a few lines. It is extremely skillful. It's looking at the adorable and also the anger-inducing, tear-fueled exhaustion of parenthood. I'll do a cutaway so that you can see me flicking through and you can see some of the spreads in detail, but it is just a very, very charming book and would make a wonderful gift. I read 4 poetry collections in June and July. I read 100 Queer Poems edited by Andrew McMillan and Mary Jean Chan. This is one of my favourite books of the year so far, and I don't just say that because there is a poem of mine in here. I just think it's a beautifully created collection of poetry which is showing lots of different aspects of queerness, from queer childhood and adolescence to queering nature and cities. It is 100 different poets writing in here, and I just loved all of the areas that it touched upon. I included this, as I said, in my favourite books of the year so far, so if you want to hear me read a little bit from that, you can head over there. I also read Bargain Bin Rom-Com by Leena Norms. I can't review this one impartially because Leena and I are friends, but I'm sure that you are familiar with her. She's been on here for a long time. If you're not, I will link her channel in the description box down below. Go over there, listen to her reading some of her poetry, and if it tickles your fancy, you might want to pick up a copy. I also read Ways of Healing by Charlotte Shevchenko Knight. This is part of the New Poets Prize. Charlotte is a British-Ukrainian poet, and this is a very moving collection talking about potential motherhood and getting pregnant maybe when you didn't anticipate to be pregnant, and then trying to decide what you want to do, but maybe the universe taking that out of your hands. So content warning for baby loss in here. I would say if you enjoy my poetry, if you've read Charlotte Eichler, poetry that really looks at sea and imagery, nature and parenthood, then this is something that you will enjoy. There's lots of folklore elements in here as well. And then I also read Pandemonium by Andrew McMillan, which is his 3rd collection of poetry. There are several different sections in this book and content warning in here for suicide. My favourite part of this book was the central part, which was kind of poetic retelling of fragments of Matthew Bourne's Swan Lake. I thought that that was just so magnificently done. There was something just very prophetic about it as well. The lake is calm tonight. The moon has dropped white feathers on the water. Tonight the lake is calm, the wavelets lap like rustling wings. The lake tonight is calm, but look who is coming into land to tear the peace asunder. Let's pause here for a second to go and make some lunch, and then we can come back and talk about the other half after that. So let's go to the kitchen. All right, we're going to make lunch, but let's have a moment for these beautiful flowers that were given to me by my aunts. I think that they're really lovely. So we're going to make gnocchi, and I think I've made gnocchi in a vlog before, but I don't think I showed how to make the sauce. So I'm just going to quickly run through everything today. What you need is 1 egg, 500 grams of potatoes, or roughly 500 grams. I think this is about 510. I'm living on the wild side. You need 600 grams of passata, some crushed chilies, some oregano, pasta flour. You need 150 grams of that. This is the one that I use. It's a 00 flour. It's very good. You need some garlic and some soft goat cheese, a handful of fresh basil, and some parmesan. So to make the gnocchi, you want to peel the potatoes, boil them, mash them, leave that to cool, then add 1 beaten egg, a large generous pinch of salt, some olive oil, about a tablespoon, and then the flour, 150 grams. Knead that together into a dough. You don't want to over knead it, but you want to make sure everything is incorporated. Then roll it out into strips and cut out gnocchi-sized pieces. You can use one of these. It's really not necessary. This is a paddle, which means you can roll the gnocchi pieces down and it gives them that shape, the indents, which means that the sauce will cling to it. But what I tend to do a lot of the time is just dip a fork in flour and then lightly press that on top of the gnocchi pieces, and it does exactly the same thing. Then you want to cook it, boil it for a couple of minutes until they float, and then I suggest frying them for a couple of minutes to give them a golden colour. As for the sauce, cut up some garlic, the basil stalks, fry that for 30 seconds, then add the passata, the crushed chilies, add as much as or as little as you want. I suggest about a teaspoon, and a large tablespoon of dried oregano. Cook that for about 10 minutes on a really low heat so that it reduces down a little bit. You might want to add a splash of white wine vinegar, a teaspoon of sugar, and some tomato puree to taste. That is up to you. It's not essential. Then right at the end of the 10 minutes, you want to add in several handfuls of grated parmesan, melt that in, take it off the heat, put it on top of the gnocchi, and add torn basil leaves and also torn up pieces of goat's cheese, and enjoy. It is delicious. Okay, let us do a time lapse. I'm rolling out the knocker here, I think it is a perfect opportunity to talk to you about the sponsor of today's video, which is Skillshare. I've been working with Skillshare for pretty much as long as I've had my channel because I think that what they do is great. They are an online learning community with thousands of classes on anything you can think of, from illustration, building websites, how to become freelance, how to decorate your home, also how to cook and how to bake. So if you would like probably more information-based and helpful videos on how to make things in the kitchen, then might I recommend Skillshare. As I said, they have so many different classes, and two that I have personally had my eye on relating to the kitchen are Easy and Versatile Baking, the one yeast dough you need to know by Julia Tershin, which is all about creating a base level dough and using it for lots of different things. And then who remembers my book Cookies that I did a couple of years ago? Well, this other class puts those to shame. This is Cookie Decorating for Beginners, Create Incredible Edible Art by Laurie Shannon. I think that I could learn some things from them. So if you're looking to pick up a new skill or have some fun, may I recommend checking out Skillshare. All of their classes are captioned, so they are accessible. They're broken down into easy, digestible chunks so you can slot them into whatever your day happens to look like. They have offered me a link, which is at the top of the description box down below. And the first 1,000 people to use the link in the description box or my code Jen Campbell will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. You've nothing to lose. Lots of things to gain. Go ahead, check out their website, have a look around. Thank you very much to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. We are back for Bookish Chat again. I decided to pick up a book that I loved when I was a kid. I used to get the audiobooks out of the library again and again and again. There's a whole series of them, but this is the only one that I had a copy of. I've now since bought, I think they are down here, yeah, new copies of the first ones in the series, and I kind of hate how they've been repackaged. I get that they had to be repackaged because the old ones were from the 80s and this definitely looks more contemporary, but I have a soft spot for the old covers as they used to come. So this is Sheila Lavelle's My Best Fiend series, and this is Trouble with the Fiend, and I inhaled this. What was interesting, it was something I'd forgotten, is that these books are actually collections of short stories. It's about a young girl called Charlie and her best friend Angela, but they have such a fraught relationship. Angela is just terrible. She just wants to prank Charlie and take the mick out of her. I suppose we would probably call it quite a toxic friendship, but it's fun to read about and it used to really make me giggle. I did enjoy revisiting this world, but like with so many books from the 80s, children's books in particular, the fat phobia in here is just so rife. Couldn't really get away from it, so that was very disappointing. Then I did a themed reading vlog where I read some of the shortest books on my TBR and I talked about them all in great detail, so I'll link that video in the description box down below. But very briefly, let me whiz through them because there was quite a mixed bag. Half I really liked and half I really didn't. So let's begin with the ones that I really liked. There were 3 of them. So this is The President's Room by Ricardo Romero, translated from the Spanish by Charlotte Coombe. This is a novel from Argentina and it's set in a nameless country where every house has an empty room reserved for the president in case he wants to visit. Our narrator is a young child who is trying to work out why this room exists. Has a bit of an existential crisis about it, starts wondering why anything exists. Are houses real? Are rooms real? Are walls basically just an extension of our own skin? It feels like you're wading through someone's fever dream. I very much enjoyed it. Cold Enough for Snow by Jessica Au ended up being one of my favourite books of the year. This is just brilliant. It's about a mother and a daughter who reunite on a trip to Tokyo in the autumn. I read this because I wanted to, and also it was really hot outside and I wanted to read about something that was cold. There is another book that I picked up recently for that reason. Sometimes it's just good to lose yourself in chilly surroundings when it is 42 degrees outside. If you want to read about tense family relationships, Japanese gardens in the autumn and Japanese food, may I press this into your hands. I also very much enjoyed The Pulse Between Dimensions and the Desert by Rios de la Luz. Like with Julia Armfield, Rios de la Luz is really a writer that you read to just be completely immersed in beautiful language. The way that she uses colour is stunning. This is a collection of short stories. I think I prefer her novel Itza, but I still very much liked this book. And then the three that I didn't enjoy were Oddfellow's Orphanage by Emily Winfield Martin. This was a bit too twee for me, a bit too sickly sweet, so not really up my street. The Factory by Hiroko Oyamada was a book that I just found supremely dull. And I feel kind of bad saying that, but I had quite high hopes for it because the premise made it sound a little bit like the TV show Severance, which I love, looking at the mundanity of work and how capitalism has infiltrated every part of our existence. And yeah, it just wasn't that great, and I'm not sure if it was the original book itself or if this is not a great translation. It's translated from the Japanese by David Boyd. I mean, I've read other books of his that he has translated and very much enjoyed them, so I think it was the original book itself, but this one was not for me. And then Bear by Marian Engel was a book that caused scandal in Canada when it was published in the 70s. It's about a woman who kind of falls in love with a bear, and I was expecting great things from this. It's based on folklore. It sounded, you know, very much my cup of tea. But again, I just found it to be very dull, and I don't know how you make a premise like that dull, but I was not into it. I was not into this book, which was a disappointment. Oh, also for that video, I was reading A Postcard from Annie by Ida Jessen, and this is translated from the Dutch by Martin Aitken, and I was very much enjoying this. The style of her writing really reminds me of Sarah Moss, but I haven't finished it, and I'm going to carry it over into Women in Translation Month. And if you would like a video where I recommend books by women in translation and show you what's on my TBR, I've done that, and I'll link that video in the description box down below. I also read The Pretty One by Kia Brown. Kia is the creator of the hashtag Disabled and Cute. She was born with cerebral palsy, and this is an essay collection talking about disability and body. It's very conversational and references pop culture a lot. It feels like she's chatting with you as a mate, which is rather lovely to read. I particularly enjoyed an essay on here about her love of chairs, like an ode to chairs and all of her favourite chairs that she has sat on in her life. I thought that was a very smart idea for an essay. I also read We Don't Know What We're Doing by Tom Morris. This is probably one of my favourite short story collections ever, I think. I've just been thinking about it a lot, and I've been sleeping on this book because I've had a copy of it since I think 2015. It's a realist collection, and it's all centred around this small town in Wales. Some of the inhabitants have left, and they're reflecting on their lives in bigger cities, and some of them have returned, some of them have never left. It made me cry several times. Tom is just so good at wrapping you up in a character's life completely and utterly for a few pages, and you don't really want to leave. Some of the interactions in this book were so painful, which is a testament to how emotive the writing is. It's not a interconnected short story in the sense that these characters' lives do not connect with each other directly, but the surrounding and the castle in particular in this town feels like a character itself within the book. So having those very familiar landmarks within the stories, I thought was a very effective way of pulling a collection together. If you would like to read something that will break your heart about characters who feel lost in lots of different ways, and many of these stories dissect toxic masculinity as well, then might I recommend this one? And I have checked and Thomas hasn't written anything else, and I hope that changes because I would very much like to read more of his writing. We have 5 more books to get through. This is I'll Go On by Hwang Jun-yun, and it is translated from the Korean by Emily Ye-won. This is a novel about found family, and it ended up being in the list of the top 10 books I would recommend by women in translation because it really got under my skin. One of those quiet novels that you're reading and you don't realise how much of an impact it's having until you're nearly at the end. There's something rather gentle and at the same time powerful about that. This is a story about found family. So it is about 2 biological sisters, but it's also about their best friend who's a boy who they've known since they were very small. And at various points they've been closer or further apart as they have grown up. But now one of them is expecting a baby, and they're kind of at that point in their life where they're all thinking about the potential to be a parent and whether or not that's something they want. They start thinking back on how their parents did or didn't equip them for the world and how they feel they would fare in that role now. There's lots of beautiful imagery to do with language and the bringing together of a language, especially when looking at Chinese text and symbols that have been coined and brought together to mean something entirely new. I guess almost like a bringing together of genes and creating a new person. Also looking at the language that you have been given by your parents and how you choose to talk about the world and yourself and them, and then how that language changes, the new language you acquire to talk about yourself and express your feelings. I thought that there was a lot to unpack here. There is a queer element to this as well, which again brings in more discussion on found family. I thought that it was really good. Then I read Raven Black by Anne Cleves. This is the first in her Shetland series. I've never seen the TV show. I've also read the first book in her Vera series, but haven't watched that TV show either. That was called Crow Trap. This is set in the Shetlands, and this is a story about a small village where one girl has been discovered dead. She's 16, she's been found on the beach, and then we discovered that another girl went missing, presumed dead, though they never found her body several years earlier. A police officer called Perez is investigating this, but we spend a lot of the text with different inhabitants of this town, which is how I like to read a crime book. I don't really love spending 100% of my time with the police. I want to get into the houses of everyone else. As I said before, I'm a nosy reader. I want to know everything about everybody. So I really liked the character development in this. I also liked the atmosphere and the discussion of the weather. It has been very warm. It was nice to read about colder climes. I obviously don't want to talk about who committed the crime in this book because that would be spoilers, but what I will say is that I was surprised by who it was, and I'm not necessarily sure that that is a good thing. I don't want to have guessed everything about a book, but I need to believe in the person who committed the crime. I need to have suspicions. It's not a case of, which I hate in crime books, where someone was brought in at the end that we'd never met before, so we could never have expected them in the first place, but I just wasn't convinced by the reveal at the end of this book, which was a shame because there were so many things about this book that I really enjoyed. But I think with a crime/thriller, the ending really does cement your overall enjoyment of a book. So I think I may pick up the second book in the series, but I'm not sure. I don't think I'll be rushing to do it. Anyway, something I did find quite odd about this text is that the person who was murdered at the beginning is a 16-year-old girl, but all of the characters, men and women, talk about her like she is a woman or was a woman. The men objectify her. One of her teachers talked about how he invited her back to her flat one time and kissed her. There was no narrative in this book, no character, no internal monologue, dialogue, whatever, to contradict that way of looking at the victim. And I thought that was a strange choice that I couldn't really get my head around it. If you've read it, let me know what you thought too, because I was speaking to Mercedes about that and she also found that a very odd choice. Then I read Chouette by Claire Oshetsky. I read this for Patreon Book Club and filmed a whole video about it, and I will link my Patreon in the description box down below. If you enjoy my channel and would like to support over there, it is $1 a month for access to all of the book club videos, a monthly bookish quiz, some other things as well. It will be linked down below, but briefly, This is a book that I loved on a sentence base level. I thought that the writing was stunning, but I found it a very, very difficult read because this is a woman who is writing about giving birth to an owl baby and how society thinks she should die and doesn't have any quality of life. And she's kind of trying to decide how she feels as a mother, both fiercely protective and also at the same time all of these complicated emotions are running through her head. I know that Claire wrote this book as her personal experience of motherhood, mothering a daughter who is trans and also is autistic. But the language in here is very much focused on using extended metaphor of physical disability, so missing body parts and using the grotesque. And I found that very difficult to read as someone who was a physically disabled baby, and I wasn't really sure that the way the extended metaphor was used worked. For me personally, I felt as though it kind of did a bit of a disservice to everyone. It was a little bit lacking in nuance, and a lot of the discussion that we were having in Patreon Book Club was about that, and a lot of disabled readers felt the same way. So the language is really wonderful. I would love to read whatever she chooses to write in the future, but I just wanted to kind of flag how I felt reading it as a disabled person in case you are also a disabled person and you've been thinking about picking this up. Might be something to bear in mind, perhaps read some extracts. I have read some brilliant articles that she has written about motherhood, and I really love her non-fiction writing on that subject. Finally, I read these two books. This is The Mental Load, a feminist comic by Emma, translated from the French by Una Dimitrievic, and this is a graphic series of essays talking about different aspects of feminism. I bought it for the title essay, The Mental Load, which is all about the responsibility of a household, not just about sharing individual tasks, but about the management of that, what tasks need to be completed and when, who is thinking about that, the emotional labour of that, and how that often in a heteronormative heterosexual relationship falls on the woman. I thought that was a really excellent essay, and I think it's also available online. If it is, I will link it down below. The other essays in this collection I found to be lacking in nuance, not really saying anything new, and a bit of a disappointment. So I wouldn't particularly recommend this book as a whole, but that one essay I really did enjoy. And then finally, this adorable book, the most adorable book. This is Mouse's Wood by Alice Melvin. This is published by my publisher Thames and Hudson, so they sent me a review copy. I loved it so much, I bought a copy for Edith, for Lauren's Edith. So it's walking through the forest at different months in the year and peering into different animals' houses and talking about the different kinds of blossoms on the trees, or when the leaves are falling, what the weather is doing. It is just the most adorable thing, and it's told in rhyme, and it is great. Picnics galore. It's kind of like The Wind in the Willows meets Animals of Farthing Wood meets Winnie the Pooh. If you have a young person in your life, I would say maybe between, well, I bought it for Edith and she's young, so she'll enjoy it more when she's older, but I would say between 2 and 5, I think this would be an excellent gift. So those are the books that I read in June and July. As you saw, some books I really loved, some that I didn't enjoy so much, and some that sit happily somewhere in the middle. I would love to know what you have been reading recently. I will list all of the titles of these books in the description box down below, and links to any videos I mentioned or any articles that I have written. If you are new and you have enjoyed this video and would like to subscribe, that would be amazing. And if you like my content and would like to consider supporting me on Patreon, that's also very kind. Details and links to that will be in the description box down below. I would love to know in a comment what you have been reading recently. Thanks again to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Go and check the link, which is at the top of the description box down below. I hope you're all doing okay, and I will be back for another video soon. Sending lots of love. Bye.